Thank you so much, Jimmy. Thanks to Nate. What a crowd. This is unbelievable. It is really great to be with you this afternoon, and it is great to be at the massive Gaylord Hotel. It's my first time here. I guess you have to go big to impress people who work on 2,000-foot tall towers. Well, by Texas standards, I think the Gaylord probably qualifies as a B&B, but anyway, thank you for inviting me to your annual conference, and more importantly, thank you for spending time with me during what is a difficult period in my life. After all, today should have been the day of my Kansas City Chiefs' first Super Bowl victory parade in 49 years. Now, I'm not saying I would have blown off this important conference to be at that parade, but I'm not saying I wouldn't have either. Now, one thing became crystal clear on Sunday night during the game. The American people were the real losers when the New England Patriots beat the Chiefs for the AFC Championship. I mean, just compare the thrilling 54-51 shootout between the Rams and the Chiefs during Week 11 with the Super Bowl 53 game. I think we know who got the better of that one. But anyway, enough about football. I'm excited to make my first appearance here at Nate's annual conference. And in a further show of the current FCC's commitment to your issues, I know that Commissioner Brendan Carr was also here this week. Thank you for scheduling Commissioner Carr's remarks before mine. You see, lately, Brendan seems determined to one-up me whenever he can. As he probably mentioned, last year I climbed a 131-foot tower in rural Colorado. Shout out to Justin Miller, who helped me do that. I have to say, my wife still hasn't forgiven me for not giving her advance notice of that. But anyway, a few months later, Brendan went up a 2,000-foot tower. During the government shutdown recently, I started growing a beard. Next thing I know, Brendan has gone full Duck Dynasty. I mean, if Brendan were speaking after me today, I suspect that he'd probably try to outdo me by bringing the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders up here along stage with him. Anyway, this may be my first time at the annual conference, but Nate and Nate's members are not new to me. I've seen you on your own turf, as Jimmy pointed out, and I understand the challenge of what you do. I already mentioned my venture up that Colorado Tower last year, but in 2018, I also visited Nate member Green Mountain Communications in Pembroke, New Hampshire. And Green Mountain staff showed me the incredibly heavy multi-band antenna and equipment that crews have to lug up these towers. And it is truly impressive when you think about the physical aspect of that feat. Last April, as Jimmy pointed out, I was in Gulfport, Mississippi and visited Millerco. And that morning I learned from the company's staff about the work that they do to maintain and repair infrastructure all the way from Wisconsin to Puerto Rico. In October, I had the chance to return the favor when we welcomed Millerco's CEO and your newly elected chairman, as I understand it, Jimmy Miller, to the commission for a tower training workshop. And when I say that I visited Nate members on your turf, that includes beyond our own shores. A few months ago, I visited a very poor neighborhood on the outskirts of New Delhi, India, to visit an American Tower cell site. This cell site provides wireless coverage to thousands of people for whom a mobile phone is literally their only digital access to the outside world. And the fiber that feeds that site is used for internet kiosks that allows poor kids without educational opportunities to learn about things like math and reading and the like. I mean, that is work that makes a difference. And to me, that is Nate. You make a difference in your communities and around the world each and every day. And so for that work that you do, I salute you from the bottom of my heart. Now, even when I'm not meeting with Nate members, I'm often talking about Nate's issues. On this current trip, for example, I'm visiting the headquarters of AT&T and Ericsson North America, two companies that are at the forefront of wireless revolutions. And in New Orleans, I met with the Louisiana Association of Broadcasters. As these meetings make clear, and as this audience certainly knows, if we want to have a thriving wireless and broadcast business, we need a thriving tower industry, and that's where you come in. I'm constantly meeting with Nate and its members for a very practical reason, or actually two practical reasons. One is the race to 5G, and the other one is the Broadcast Repack stemming from the FCC's incentive auction. These are two of the top priorities on the FCC's agenda, and it is critical that we tackle these challenges facing your companies if we hope to deliver on our priorities. And so I'll briefly discuss each, starting with 5G. Everyone in this room, and increasingly people outside this room, understand that when it comes to 5G policy, infrastructure will be essential. And that is because 5G requires a lot more densification of networks. Now, among other things, we'll need to install hundreds, if not thousands, of small cells, with an exponential increase in the number of antenna locations from our current networks. Now, I've given him a lot of flack in my remarks, but honestly, Commissioner Carr deserves a ton of credit for spearheading the FCC's work to streamline our rules and to make it easier for the people in this room to build and to maintain and to expand America's wireless networks. And as many of you heard from him a few days ago, we have made significant progress toward that goal. We've reformed our historic preservation and environmental regulations so that small cells don't have to jump through the same regulatory hoops as a 200-foot tower. Last August, we advanced a federal one-touch make-ready policy that will make it quicker and easier and cheaper to build out networks. And in September, we approved an important order promoting 5G infrastructure. It sets a reasonable 60-day shot clock for cities to rule on small cell siting applications and reasonable limits on siting fees, limits that allow localities to recover their costs. And I appreciate Nate's efforts, strong support for all of this work. I hope and expect that these actions will make it easier for you to do your jobs and for more people in our country to benefit from this wireless revolution. With that, I'd like to shift gears and dive into the Broadcast Repack, which is an important issue for Nate's members. The broadcast incentive auction was one of the most challenging undertakings in the FCC's history. Now, most of the people who say that have in mind the mechanics of creating a two-sided auction, taking spectrum that's used by broadcasters and repurposing it for the wireless companies. So there's a broad perception that when the auction closed in April of 2017, that the hard part was over. But that's not the case at all. As a result of the incentive auction, about half of every one of America's broadcast TV stations will be changing their transmission frequencies to clear part of the spectrum for wireless use. So we're talking about a channel and/or a location change for about 1,000 full-power and Class A television broadcasters and about 2,000 low-power and TV translator stations. As you know, these changes don't happen by just flipping a switch or pushing a magic button. No, it happens because the men and the women in this room, shout out to the women of Nate, go out and do dangerous and hard work every day. Simply put, without you, the incentive auction cannot succeed in the end. Now, the value of this complex and challenging work performed on the tallest towers in America, on a pretty tough time schedule, can't be overstated. And that is why the limited availability of tower crews capable of doing this work was a big factor in our transition planning from the very beginning. We designed a phased transition schedule that allows both tower companies and equipment manufacturers to prioritize stations in the early phases and to strategically allocate resources. We built in flexibility to allow for adjustments so that safety is never compromised. So some have asked in Washington and perhaps here, how is the transition going? Well, together with broadcasters and Nate members and equipment manufacturers and other industry stakeholders, we made a ton of progress since the close of the incentive auction and the start of the transition period in April of 2017. At the end of phase one, which just ended on November 30th of last year, 143 repack stations had already moved off their pre-auction channels. Now, by contrast, according to our original plan, only 90 stations were supposed to be repacked by the end of phase one. So that's good news, we're ahead of schedule. Right now, we're in the middle of phase two, which ends on April 12th of this year. And thus far, over 20 of the approximately 115 stations assigned to phase two have moved to the new channel. So the next 2 months will be very busy for Nate members. Not only are we ahead of schedule, we have the resources to do the job. Thanks to the additional $1 billion provided by Congress last year, we now have a total of $2.7 billion available to reimburse broadcasters for repack costs. And the fund administrator has already approved about $350 million in reimbursements. So that is real money going out the door. Successfully completing the repack on schedule will require continued coordination between tower companies and equipment manufacturers and broadcasters and government officials. And for the FCC's part, our staff is in daily contact with stakeholders. We're making sure that stations are on pace to move by their completion dates, to address transition issues that might come up, and to help stations as appropriate, and when doing so, wouldn't impact other repack stations. Now, the help available for stations that face challenges in completing a channel change is pretty broad. It includes applying to the FCC for a change in its phase deadline, extending a construction permit deadline, temporary operation on an interim facility, temporary use of an alternate channel, or temporary multi-party use of a channel or increased pairwise interference. Now, in English, what that means is that we are doing everything we can to keep transitioning stations on the air for their viewers during the transition period. And we've heard concerns from both tower companies and broadcasters that limited tower crew availability and weather delays might make it difficult to meet deadlines in future phases. And so I encourage tower companies to be proactive. Coordination with stations and equipment manufacturers will be key, and working together, I am optimistic that we will be able to be as successful as we were in phase one and to stay on track to complete all of this work for full power and Class A stations by July of 2020, which isn't that far off. Now, for all this talk about broadcast repacking, I should also note that NATE members are also deploying infrastructure so that wireless companies can put the licenses that were awarded during the incentive auction to use. And this deployment is now a reality in many places and is underway in many others. For example, one carrier has already lit up service using 600 megahertz spectrum in more than 1,500 cities and 37 states, including Puerto Rico. For many of your members, this is pretty intense, ongoing work, and for American consumers, this means new competition and opportunities to benefit from 5G. Now, to be honest, all of these next-generation wireless networks are doing a lot more than keeping you busy. They're creating an imbalance between the supply of and the demand for skilled communications tower technicians. I've heard about this during every visit from New Hampshire to Mississippi. It's hard enough finding people with the technical skills to maintain and service communications equipment. It's harder finding people who can do this work hundreds of feet in the air. And that is why we need to invest in the training and development of our communications workforce now and into the future. Now, this would not only boost the overall economy, it would also create good-paying jobs all across America. And along these lines, I'm glad that we've seen some bipartisan legislation introduced this past year by Representatives Mark Wayne Mullen and Dave Loebsack. These bills would establish and expand job training opportunities for tower workers. I find a lot in this legislation to like, and I want to assure you that the FCC is aware of this challenge and is committed to working with Congress and NATE and others to move the ball forward. So, I've talked about 5G and the broadcast repack and a few other things, but I want to make clear as I close that even without all of this, I would still be traveling across the country to meet with you and to bring your stories and your successes and your concerns back to the FCC. And I would still be working with you because I believe that the digital revolution is not just about inventors tinkering in their garage or dorm room. It's about work crews climbing towers to install antennas and build the networks of tomorrow. And I would still be working with you because, as much as our society and our media celebrate Silicon Valley whiz kids as the great risk takers, I'm impressed by the risks taken by the men and women in this room, people who literally put their lives on the line to make digital communications possible. And I would still be working with you because I believe that every American, no matter where he or she lives, should have access to the opportunities of the digital age. And I know that you help to make that a reality for often overlooked rural communities on the wrong side of the digital divide. And while this might sound a little bit cliched, I would still be working with you because many of you remind me of home. I grew up in a town called Parsons, nestled in the southeast corner of the great state of Kansas. Population, keep it up, I like it, all right. Population 9,800, hours away from big cities that people on the coasts know about. And so when I visit places like Millerco or Green Mountain, go to places like Gulfport and Pembroke, when I visit small towns everywhere that are served by NATE's members, it's a familiar feeling. It's a feeling about meeting people who love where they live and want to make America a better place. And sure, they care about their bottom line, but they also care about their neighbors, and they realize that their companies play a critical role in promoting the public good. Now, all of you are in the infrastructure business. You build things, both literally and figuratively. You help the foundation of communities like Parsons, Kansas, and Gulfport and Pembroke a lot stronger. And for that, I am personally very grateful as a rural American. And as long as I'm at the FCC, I'll continue to roll up my sleeves, maybe continue wearing some wingtips up a tower or two, and continuing to work with you to expand digital opportunity to all corners of this country. Thanks again for your attention, for all that you do, and keep up the great work.